Welcome to our webinar on Trados. Some of you have reached out to us about getting more tips on using Trados, so we've put together this short presentation. While Trados isn't always the most intuitive tool, it is one of the more mature and powerful CAT tools on the market. This means that if you find yourself being frustrated by some tedious aspect of translation, there is probably a fix for that in Trados. I'll discuss some of the tips we use in-house. This is by no means comprehensive. First, let me give a short disclaimer. I am not the foremost expert on Trados, and I'm confident that many of you know more about the tool than I do. So some of these tips will be very basic, but at least a few may be new to you. Also, I will not be able to provide specific information about Trados 2022 or Trados Live as we do not work with them yet. Here's an overview of what I'll be discussing today. First, I'll talk about general settings. Making sure your Trados is properly configured can save you some headaches in the long term. Then we'll look at tips you can employ while you translate and proofread within Trados. Next, we'll get into terminology and troubleshooting, which present a lot of challenges to freelancers and in-house linguists alike. And finally, I'll touch on some plugins you can download to make your life easier, as well as other resources for becoming a Trados expert. At the end, I'll also have a Q&A session, and I will share my screen so I can show you things directly in Trados. If you would like slides of the presentation, you can email vendor management at the end, and you can also receive a recording of the presentation this way. So let's begin. So let's start with settings. Let's say you've just acquired Trados. Before you start translating, you should have a look at the default settings and make adjustments to ensure you're getting the most out of the software. We can begin with the editor settings. So these adjust how the editor works, that is, the interface in which you translate. If you change the settings under File Options, they will apply to all jobs you handle in Trados. I'll focus on these 4 settings: spell check, autocorrect, font adaptation, and auto propagation, and how they can help you. But I encourage you to take a closer look at all the settings to see what will be helpful for you personally. For spelling, the default spell checker in Trados is something called Hunspell. However, the best spell checker for English, at least, is definitely MS Word or Microsoft Word. So you can adjust that here. You may want to check which of the 2 options is best for your target language, though. Next, we have autocorrect. Here you can modify the default quotation marks that Trados makes. For example, Supertext generally prefers smart or curly quote marks over straight quote marks, and you can choose here to automatically replace them. Since someone who signed up asked, it is also possible to find and replace all quotation marks in a document. You can do this using regular expressions, which I will demonstrate at the end of the presentation. You can also configure the software to automatically correct certain types of errors. So if you find yourself making the same kinds of typos again and again, you can enable replace text as you type and add common typos yourself. If you enable auto propagation, which is required for most Supertext projects, as well as other agencies, repeated segments will be automatically translated once one of the instances has been confirmed. You can change the settings to determine whether this should apply from the first segment in the document or from the next segment in the document, as well as whether or not a prompt window pops up when a segment will be auto-propagated. However, I would advise against getting a prompt window as this does slow you down when you're working on a big project. Finally, font adaptation allows you to adjust the font size in the editor view so that it isn't too big or too small. Adjusting the color contrast here under Adapt Font Colors also ensures you won't be tripped up by texts that are yellow or another color that is particularly hard to see. Of course, when you export the translated texts, the target file will still have the original formatting. So again, all these settings are under File, Options, and then Editor in the window that pops up. This is just to show you the difference that font adaptation can make when working on a text in Trados. This is the exact same source file where the first sentence is size 72 font and the second sentence is size 6 and a very pale yellow that you can hardly see. Without adapting the fonts, this would be very challenging, especially if the first sentence was really long. But simply enabling font adaptation makes the text much easier to read. And again, these settings will be applied to all the jobs you work on in Trados. Shortcuts can also be really helpful for speeding up your work. You can see what shortcuts are pre-configured in Trados by going to File, Options, Keyboard Shortcuts, and even change or add your own shortcuts. Here is a list of the shortcuts we tend to use a lot in-house. These include shortcuts for confirming segments, the concordance search, inserting the source text into the target segment, and changing the case of a word. However, keep in mind that you can accomplish a couple of these with just a single click, namely creating a preview file and highlighting all the segments. To highlight all the segments in a file, click on the upper left-hand corner of the text right above where the segment number 1 is listed. All segments in the file will be selected, and if you right-click, you can then change the status of all the segments at once. For example, you can also clear the target text if you want, or transfer the source text to the target segment. The Create Preview File feature is already integrated into the Quick Access taskbar at the top of the page in Trados. Just click on the icon of a piece of paper with a magnifying glass. So before you even open your first project in Trados, explore your settings and make sure they're to your liking and get familiar with the most useful shortcuts. Also, ensure that auto propagation is enabled. Now let's say you've gotten to translating a project in Trados. I'll point out some of the things to watch for, focusing on the editor view, translation memories, and tags. First, let's look at the editor. Here is the default view of the editor when you open a file for translation, either by double-clicking on a file or selecting Open for Translation from the ribbon or drop-down menu. I just want to highlight a few things. So you'll see at the top there is the translation results window and term recognition window. These two windows are essential for conformity with the translation memory and term base. So if they don't appear, make sure to add them by clicking in the ribbon at the top of the View tab. Also, if you see the phrase "No open translation memories" under translation results, immediately alert the project manager, since all of our projects should have a TM attached. Likewise, while not all of our clients have term bases, if you know for a fact that a client does from past work, for example, or because the PM has asked you to stick to the term base, flag the PM if you see the message "No open term base." At the bottom of the screen, you can also see how many characters, including spaces, are in the current segment. Translation memories form the foundation of any computer-assisted translation tool. These save previously translated sentences so they can be reused in future translations, ensuring consistency across an entire client's language. When a project manager at Supertext creates a project, they should set it up so that context matches, 100% matches, and fuzzy matches above 70 to 80% are visible directly in the translation. However, there are a few other things to look for. First of all, you can use the concordance search by highlighting a word or phrase in the target or source segment and using the shortcut F3. This allows you to search for individual terms or phrases in the translation memory that might not show up in a fuzzy match in order to check for consistency. It's also really helpful to check for translations of specialist terms that are not in the term base. If you come across any words that tend to be translated in different ways, use the concordance search. So for example, in English, the German city Düsseldorf can be spelled with or without the umlaut. So if you come across it in a text, you might want to highlight the name in the German source and press F3 to see how it was spelled in previous translations. Sometimes it can be useful to add a supplementary TM or an any TM to a project in addition to the default client TM. Any TM is for translation memories that have source or target languages that differ from the languages attached to the project. For example, some clients translate into both US English and UK English. For these clients, both the US and UK TMs may be useful to the translator. One thing that's worth pointing out is that while TMs are a powerful tool for researching consistency, they cannot check for consistency with external content such as reference files. However, there is a plugin called Web Lookup that allows you to search terms on the web directly from Trados. I can show you how that looks at the end as well. Freelancer brought this to my attention last week, so I haven't had time to explore it in depth, but I will show you quickly. Here are a few screenshots so you can see the features up close. At the top, we have the concordance search. So here we've highlighted the term Übersetzungstool in German. Before that, below that, you can see the orange warning message that shows up in the translation results window when a segment in the translation you're working on is translated differently than in the memory. In this case, you'll usually want to make sure the new translation stays consistent with the TM. At the bottom, you can see how to add another translation memory, or specifically an NETM. In this case, we've attached the Supertext English UK TM in addition to the US TM. Make sure that if you do use an NETM, it is not set to update so that the spelling remains consistent in the language variant. Tags are probably every translator's worst nightmare. You can control which tags you see in the View tab by scrolling right. And yes, you can enable font adaptation here too. That is those little symbols on the side. Tags are very important to how a final translation looks, but they can make reading a text in Trados very difficult. So it's important to make sure you choose an option that allows you to see where there are tags. But showing partial tag text rather than full tag text can be easier to read. Now let's move on to proofreading in Trados, or bilingual review as it's called in the Trados platform. All information about the translation memories and tags also applies here, but there are some additional features helpful specifically for revision. First, let's look at the Trados for Review view. If you right-click on a file in the Projects view, it is the second option that shows up in the list. I will not explore the third option in this list, Open for Sign-Off, which is the view we use when we finalize jobs in-house. If you're doing a bilingual review job for Supertext, we prefer that you use the review mode, as tracked changes are automatically enabled and the status of segments changes to reviewed when you confirm them. I'll quickly show you what these look like on the next slide. So you can see the segments here have a magnifying glass icon with a check mark, which shows that they've been reviewed, and you can see track changes in the second segment. One thing I'd like to point out is that the default for review layout is different from the for translation layout. For example, the comments window appears below rather than translation results, and the term-based recognition window is not there. But as I mentioned before, you need both these windows for consistency, so use the View tab to add them manually. For the translation results window, you just need to click at the bottom. But for the term recognition, you'll need to add it from the ribbon. But once you've added them once, they should appear for all future projects. So this just applies for the first time you're doing a review in Trados. So you can see here we are still in the review mode, but the translation results and term recognition windows are visible because I added them there. An important feature that I mentioned while discussing shortcuts is the preview function. This allows you to see the translation in its final format, that is usually Word or Excel. This offers a number of advantages since in addition to seeing the final layout, you can take advantage of Microsoft's various revision features. You can run a spelling and grammar check, which is more extensive than the MS Word spell check in Trados. Though I believe there is also a grammar check plugin you can download. Some other Word features you can use are the paragraph view to check for formatting, the read aloud function to listen to your translation. This can be helpful when cross-checking with the source text to make sure no text is missing or no words are missing, for example. The focus mode or immersive reader allow you to look at a text with new eyes, which can also be very helpful when doing revision. Word now also offers editor suggestions, which I personally don't find very useful, but you may. If you have macros set up in Word, you can also use them here. However, remember that if you make changes in the preview file, they are not added into Trados, so be sure to make corrections directly in Trados. Here are some screenshots of those features in Word that I mentioned. If you go to the Review tab in Word, you'll find the editor suggestions and Read Aloud function. In the View tab, you can see the Focus View and Immersive Reader, which I provided screenshots of at the bottom. The Paragraph View can be enabled directly from the Home tab. Now back to Trados. You can also find a lot of useful things in the Review tab in Trados. Here you can enable track changes whether or not you're working in the review mode. Track changes should be used for all bilingual review jobs for Supertext. If you find track changes distracting personally, you can change the view at the top to no markup so you don't see them as you work, but they'll still be added to the text. The filters can help you target specific segments as you review. For example, newly translated content, fuzzy matches where mistranslations often creep in, unconfirmed or draft segments, segments with tracked changes, or segments that are numbers only. These last kinds of segments, numbers only, come up a lot in finance reports, and it's important to check that the numbers are correct. So this can be really useful there. Finally, you have the spell check and verify functions. Verify also is called the QA check. Both of these should be run on every bilingual review job before sending it back to Supertext. The QA check will flag warnings for various kinds of inconsistencies. While some of these warnings are irrelevant, it's another way to find hard to see issues within the text, such as double spaces or missing punctuation. While not Trados specific, I also wanted to touch on comments. Depending on the circumstances, it can be challenging for project managers or language managers to review and potentially rewrite every comment left by a translator or reviewer. So it's important to be sparing, be specific, and to write in client-friendly language. We expect translators and reviewers to do their own research, so only leave questions about things that cannot be researched independently. If you notice a significant error in the source text, so something that is beyond the scope of a basic typo, you should flag it to the project manager as soon as possible via email rather than leaving a comment. However, comments citing sources of terms you've used are always welcome, as they can be useful for the reviewer or person finalizing the job. So to review, here's a checklist of things to look out for when translating or doing a bilingual review. First, make sure that the translation results and term recognition windows are visible. Then check that the translation memory and term base are attached. Look out for consistency as you go along, using the term base and concordant search to help you out. Confirm each segment as you go, as these sentences will be auto-propagated if they appear elsewhere in the text. Review the text in a preview file if possible to check for the layout. And at the end, run a spell check and a QA check. So in this next section, I'll go into more detail on terminology. I'll show you how to use a term base and talk a little bit about auto text and auto suggest, which can be used to auto complete commonly used words. Here we have the term recognition box. If you type the first letter of a suggested term from the term base, it will be automatically completed, so you don't have to type the entire word. I can show you what this looks like in a couple of slides. So here, the person has just typed N and the entire term from the term base is being suggested. When a term shows up in the term base, it's important to open the term details to get more information using this little dictionary icon. This opens the term viewer where you can see details on who created the term base entry and when, as well as contextual information. For example, a term like Wirtschaft or Anlage in German can be translated in multiple ways. And if you're not sure which way to translate it, you'll need to look at those contextual details to figure out which term to use. Likewise, while it's imperative to stick to the term base, you may encounter terms that look incorrect or outdated. If this is the case, seeing the term details can tell you when the term was created. If you know that the official terminology has changed since that date, you can add a comment stating as much. You can also change your settings so that this information, the term details, are partially visible directly in the term recognition window. To do this, click on the hit list icon as shown in the screenshot in the upper right, then select fields in the window that pops up, and then select all. This is all described in the document on how to use term bases uploaded to the Supertext Freelancer info portal as well. So if you need more details, you can look there. You can also search for specific terms in the term-based search, which is right next to the term-based term recognition. Next, I want to talk quickly about auto-suggest dictionaries and auto text. These make suggestions when you start typing a word, which can save you a lot of time in the long term. You can find these under File Options, Auto-Suggest. An auto-suggest dictionary is a dictionary of suggested terms that you create from a translation memory. To do this, however, the translation memory needs to have at least 10,000 units. However, you can take advantage of suggested terms without creating a separate dictionary. When you enable auto-suggest, terms and phrases that are already in the term base and translation memory will pop up as shown here. The icon tells you where the translation comes from. You can hover your mouse over the icon to make sure. So here the first option comes from the term base and the second option comes from the memory. You can also add auto text if you want to enter frequently used terms directly in Trados to be suggested for your projects. To do this, navigate to auto text under options and add terms for your target language. You do not enter a source word here, so this is not like a bilingual term base. It's really just for typing faster. When a term from auto text pops up, it has a different icon, which you can see at the bottom here. It looks like a keyboard. Now I want to talk about group share troubleshooting. So this is hands down the issue we receive the most feedback about. There are some instances where the server is running slowly and needs to be restarted, which has to be done by a tech professional, or cases where the server is just down, as occurred during the migration to Trados 2021 a couple of months back. However, a lot of group share problems can be solved simply by closing and restarting Trados. Now I'll go through some of the common problems we have here, most of which are also covered in our guide to group share, which is linked to every group share job. First, you may be unable to log into group share. When you try to sign in, make sure the port number is correct. It should be 443, and that the box "This requires a secure connection" is ticked. Second, ensure that your login details are correct. You should be using the same email as your Supertext account and an API token. How do you find an API token, you ask? To find your API token, go to your settings page in the Supertext system. Scroll down to the very bottom to API authentication tokens and click on New API token. Then create a label for the new API token. This is not the password you enter into group share, and the label can be whatever you like. Supertext API token, my API token, whatever you want. Then click the green check mark to generate the API token. A pop-up will appear with the token. This is the password that you enter in group share. The reason we do things with an API token is because it is more secure from a data standpoint. If you're still having issues logging in, keep in mind that group share does not work for Trados 2015 or earlier, and that if you are working with Trados 2017, you need to have installed all the most recent updates. Issue number 2, you're unable to check out a file. First, try restarting Trados. If that doesn't work, remove the project from your list, restart Trados again, and reopen the project using the Open Project button in the toolbar. If you don't see the assigned project in the list when you try to open it, restarting Trados will probably fix your problem. If you can't check in a file, save your work and restart Trados. I know this is getting a little bit repetitive. If that doesn't work, you can locate the project's XLIF files by clicking on Explore Containing Folder in the ribbon at the top, and then send the XLIF to the PM. By the way, if you create a target file, that will also be sent to this Explore Containing folder. So you can just click on that button to access it. The PM can use the XLIF to populate the project themselves. However, the workaround with the XLIFs is a last resort, so please try restarting Trados before you take that route. Finally, if the Finish Job button does not appear despite the file being checked in, click the Refresh button on the job page. This will usually do the trick. So now we can move on to our extra credit, which is the Trados App Store. Plugins from the App Store can be used to make your life easier in a number of ways. During this session, I'll just be highlighting 2 plugins, the Studio Subtitling plugin and Vertical Review. However, there are also plugins for Web Lookup, I believe Microsoft Word and Grammar Check, and a European Union glossary, as well as a lot of other things. So definitely explore. One caveat is that the App Store currently seems to be having some issues, so hopefully those will be fixed sometime in the next week or 2. There is a workaround for accessing the App Store in the meantime if you have Trados 2021 or 2022. So let's look at Studio Subtitling. There is also a guide available in the Freelancer Info portal with a step-by-step instructions on how to install this, as well as a document with rules for subtitling. But one thing I want to point out here is that while you used to need to download a separate file type plugin for SRT files, the SRT file type is already included in Trados 2021. Once you download the plugin, it will appear in the View tab in 2 windows, the Subtitling Preview window and Subtitling Data Preview, Subtitling Data window. I'm highlighting this plugin because it allows you to view subtitles directly in the video and perform spotting in Trados. So this is what this looks like in practice. Using the plugin is just a little bit more complicated than downloading it. First, you need to download the video and upload it to Trados via the Settings button within the Subtitling Preview box. The video should always be available for download for Trados subtitling projects from Supertext. Should be in the project. Once you do that, you'll see the video in Trados and the translated subtitles will appear as they will in the final video. So you can see at the bottom, it's just a thin strip, but the subtitle is shown directly in the video as it would. If you notice that a subtitle seems to be poorly synced, so it doesn't appear at the same time that someone is speaking, you can shift its placement directly in the spotting bar, so you can move these lines around at the bottom as you see fit. If you open the subtitling data tab when using this plugin, you can also check the words per minute and characters per minute, which will appear in red if they exceed the recommended amount. You can also see what those recommendations are in the project settings under QA check Studio subtitling verification settings. Next, I want to highlight the vertical review plugin. This simply shows the target segment below the source segment rather than side by side, which can be much quicker for comparing things like dates, names, and numbers. It sounds really simple, but it can really be very helpful. And again, this comes in really handy for reports or tables. So that sums up the core of my presentation, but there are some more resources for getting familiar with Trados that I want to introduce to you. First of all, the RWS Documentation Center has pages on basically every feature you can think of, and the Trados YouTube channel shows videos on how to use a number of features and plugins. There's also Paul Filkin's blog, Multifarious. So Paul Filkin worked for Trados for many years. If you go on any troubleshooting forums, you'll often see a Paul answering your question, and that is Paul Filkin. And his blog posts go into great depth about more obscure functionalities in Trados and troubleshooting. I've also linked an article about regular expressions. Regular expressions can be used to do things like batch replace different quote marks and check for inconsistent spelling of certain terms. I'll show an example of this at the beginning of the Q&A with quote marks. Regular expressions are basically an unsophisticated kind of programming, which means that until you really get to know the basics, you'll be doing a lot of copying and pasting of formulas. And those formulas, you can find directories for those formulas just by searching on Google as well. Some of these features were also discussed in the Supertext proofreading webinar I held a couple of years ago. And there are more step-by-step guides in the Supertext info portal, specifically for the subtitling plugin and for term bases. So again, be sure to explore that. So now that we're at the end of the presentation, it's time to answer your questions. So I have people sent me a lot of different questions beforehand, so I'll try to get to some of those, and you can also write questions directly in the Q&A in the event. For now, I'm going to close the presentation and open my screen in Trados so I can show you things there. Give me 1 second here. So here you'll see my screen in Trados. And like I said, I wanted to show you how to use regular expressions to replace quotation marks. So in this file, I just kind of randomly put these curly quote marks around a few random words. And if we want to replace those with straight quote marks, if I go to replace, so here I've already gone ahead and typed the formula for the regular expression here. But before you even look at the formulas, be sure that you click on Use at the bottom, and then Regular Expressions. And this is how you would look up if you have text that's within, in this case, quotation marks. This is how you could use this formula, sort of the \s in brackets, the opening quote mark, then this represents the whatever random text we have, and then the closing quote mark. And then you would use this formula to include the opening and closing quote marks that you would like to replace. So then if I click on replace, that will automatically replace the word. If I'll click on replace all, find next, seems like it didn't do the first one. Yeah. And here, this way you can change all quote marks in a document. This can also be really useful, for example, if you have single quote marks and you need to change them to be one thing or another, because if you were just to search, for example, an opening quote mark and then replace all, you might have the wrong, it might represent an incorrect apostrophe in other cases. So this can be really useful for things like that. But let me get on to the questions from the Q&A here. Okay, so the first question was from Liz Laufer. Hi, I missed what you were saying about enabling auto-suggest without creating a dictionary. So if you can use auto text for that. So I'll show you what that looks like here. Let's go to File, Options, and then he's already navigated here, auto-suggest. So first here, enable auto-suggestion. These are all the places that will provide terms, suggested terms. In auto text, you would just add terms here. Oh. I've just heard that the my window can't be seen. Let me try to 1 second. Sorry. Can someone please confirm whether my window is actually visible? Okay. Sorry about that. Here, let me just quickly show the regular expressions again. I think my window should be visible now. So if I go to Find Replace, and then here at the bottom, click on Use and then Regular Expressions. This is how you would add formulas to check for things like quote marks or inconsistent spellings. And like I mentioned before, you can use you can find directories on those regular expression formulas online. For the auto text, again, File, Options, and under auto suggest, auto text here you can just add text and then, you know, I don't know, just add it here. Okay, another question, do you have to pay for the plugins? The answer is it depends. Most of the plugins I discussed are free. I think just most of the plugins in general are free. There are a few that you need to pay for though, I think. Will the links be active in the presentation? Yes. I am using Trados 2019. Should I upgrade to 2021? That's a good question. So there are a few advantages to 2021 over 2019. Okay, yeah, seems like my screen is working now. There are a few advantages to 2021 over 2019. Mainly they have some new file types. I think 2022 has even more new file types. And in general, it does help ensure you have fewer issues with, there are some ways in which it helps with troubleshooting. However, I would say there probably isn't as significant of a difference between 2021 and 2019 as there is between like 2019 and previous versions. So yeah, in general, I'm supposed to encourage you to always update. So I guess that's what I'll encourage you to update, but I wouldn't say it's like a deal breaker. Let's see. I often experience the following problem when working with translation packages, so not group share. The TM checkbox is not selected, and when I try to click on it, I get the error message, reference not set to an instance of the object, or sometimes I see another TM in the list. Which is the right way to manually add the TM? Through project setting, all language pairs, or file options language pairs? That's a good question. So in the difference, the settings under project settings and under options are more or less the same, but the ones under file options apply to all your projects, and the ones in project settings only apply to the specific project. So you'll definitely want to add those via the project settings, because my guess is if you're adding a translation memory, it's only for, you only want to use it for the project you're working on, the project in question that you're working on. Yeah. Are there any other questions from the chat? Otherwise, I would check on, I could also answer some more questions from the that were asked beforehand. Just one second. Oh yeah, so one question that was asked before the presentation was, how can you use the QA tools independently? So again, here you can, again, you can do it either via project settings, which would be for that specific project, or if you want to create a QA check that would be applied to all your projects, go to File Options. If you go to File Options and then Verification, QA Checker 3.0. So here you can define for yourself what kind of errors you want to check for. So that has all these different things, and then you can go ahead and set them yourself. And then once you do that, you can export the settings, and then if you want to apply them elsewhere in Trados or save those settings with somebody else, but you would just change those settings here under verification. Let's see. Another question was, how do you merge segments? So I will show here, if I want to merge these two segments, then you click on the keyboard, you would press Shift or Control to highlight both of them, right click, and then merge segments. It isn't always possible to merge segments. Usually, for example, if there is a hard break between two segments, you won't be able to merge them. If you're working directly from an XLIF file, you might not be able to. File types that are not Word can be tricky with merging segments, so it might not always be feasible, but you just highlight whatever segments you want to merge. Right click here on the side where the segment numbers are, and then merge the segments. There's also a shortcut. Here's another. Do you recommend downloading the Trados Studio 2021 SR2 update? Yes, I do. That has fixed some bugs for us. Hello, I am considering investing in Trados 2022. Do we have to buy a license, or is a subscription sufficient when working with translation agencies? This is another really good question. So first of all, I have heard some translators complaining about 2022. I know that there are a lot of, there's some really interesting new features, but as always happens with a new release, they might still have some bugs to figure out. So you might want to start with 2021, to be honest. But second of all, in terms of whether to get a subscription or a license, I'd say if you're just starting out and you haven't used a CAT tool very much, and you only have one main language pair, then it's fine to just work with a subscription. So most agencies will send you packages that you can work with, and I believe you can also work with group share with a subscription. However, subscriptions are, I believe, limited to just 5 language pairs, and that may sound like a lot, but let's say if your main language is German into English, then you will have Swiss German into UK English, Swiss German into US English, German German into US English, German German into UK English, so that you're already at 4 language pairs. So if you have more than one language pair that you translate with, you probably want to buy a license. You also aren't able to create your own projects if you don't have a license, and there are some other features that might not be available to you. But if it's, if you're new to CAT tools in general and you really just have one language pair, then the subscription is probably fine. How do you import one TM into another? So I won't be able to show that to you right now because I don't have like the required sample files, but you can do that here in the translation memories tab. at the bottom, and you would open a memory here, and then import a TMX file. It's a little bit more complicated, but I can maybe provide a more detailed answer to that in a blog post or something later, because I don't have the examples to really show right now. But now that we're in this tab, in the translation memories tab, I know there were also some questions about alignments. So again, I also don't have sample files to show you exactly how that works. But basically an alignment is if you have the you have a pre-existing translation. So you have a text, for example, you have the source text and the target text as Word files, but the job wasn't done via Trados, or you don't actually have access to the associated translation memory. In that case, you can align the documents here. So if you just click on align single file, you can also align multiple files. Find the source file, the target file, and then the segment shown up here, and you can kind of relink the sentences to make sure that the segments are kind of aligned, and then turn that into a translation memory. So that's used a lot with annual reports, for example, because there is often a long phase of doing changes to the final layout, and just making little changes after the project is already outside of Trados. And in that case, we'll do a new alignment every year with the final source and target annual report, so we have the final translation to use for the annual report for the following year. You just see if there are any other questions. One question was whether Trados is compatible with PowerPoints. Yes, it is. It's compatible with a large number of file types. That is the advantage of Trados over other CAT tools. It tends to be compatible with a greater range of file types. If you go to File Options, File Types here, so here are all the different file types that you can translate in Trados. There are also you can also download plugins for adding additional file types. So as I mentioned, that it used to be that for subtitling, you would have to download a second plugin that would, in order to add the SRT file type here. So this isn't even completely comprehensive, but you can download a wide array of file types in Trados. Another question was, what is the best way to manage TMs and terminology over multiple projects in the same specialist area, even over tens or hundreds of projects and many years? So that's a very good question. It is quite the question. I would say there are multiple ways of dealing with that. In-house at Supertext, one thing we did was we created a reference translation memory on data protection. A few years back, the Datenschutzverordnung, the EU data protection directive was passed, and that meant that a lot of people were ordering privacy policies and data protection guidelines. In that case, we created a reference TM, and so you could add that TM to any project that was like a privacy policy, and the reference TM would not be set to update, but you could use the segments from it. And as you are aware, if you've translated those, like 90% of the text is the same across all privacy policies. So that's something that can be useful. But I don't think there's any really ideal way of doing it for all industries or for all kinds of projects. You kind of have to see for yourself what kinds of projects and clients you have, and what kind of reference TMs or reference term bases would be useful for you, and then create those yourself. Any other questions? Oh, one question was let's see, when in review mode with track changes left on, and there are repetitions with the same changes, how do you refuse such changes at once in all relevant segments? Should you disagree with suggested change? So the best way to do that is actually just to reject it. So you can do that, either right click, or you can also do that directly up here to reject. So here I'm going to reject that. And then if you have auto propagation enabled, you would just confirm this segment, and then it would be auto propagated throughout the document. So just reject it and then confirm, and then it'll automatically replace all the other repetitions in the same project. So another question was, I don't quite understand the difference between two TM project settings, all language combinations, and then the specific language combination of the project. Like, to be honest, I'm not sure I understand all the differences, but with a lot of projects, the project manager will set them up for multiple languages. So let's say you have one text and it needs to be translated into 5 different languages. The project manager can set it up so that it's all through the same project, and that's why you would see why they have a section that's all language combinations rather than just for the one language. Yeah, in terms of plugins, I can also quickly show you this this web lookup plugin, so you can decide whether it's of interest to you. So up here in the View tab, here you have any kind of windows you can see, including the plugins. If I click on Web Lookup, so here you can automatically, if you go to a website and look for stuff directly in the Trados window. So this can definitely be useful if you don't have a lot of screen space. In practice, if you do have multiple screens, I don't know that it's actually that much more efficient than just searching in a browser, but I also haven't explored this in depth, so maybe somebody else is of a different opinion. What is the difference between Trados Studio 2022 Starter and Trados Studio Freelance Subscription? To be honest, they've kind of changed the names of these different things again and again. So I think Trados 2022 starter is the full license, or maybe not a full license, but like a limited license. And the subscription is what you pay for every year, and that's the one where you can't actually create projects, and you're limited to just 5 language combinations. Are there any other questions? There are a few more that people submitted beforehand, but there are things that I'm not sure I'll be able to answer in this format. So I have not used the cloud in Trados 2022. It's also available with Trados 2021. I think that's what the Trados Live is. But I haven't worked with it myself, so I can't give any information on that. Okay, if I don't get any questions in the next 30 seconds, I will end the presentation. Okay, so in that case, I will stop sharing my screen, and thank you so much for taking part. A lot of the information I presented, I think all the information I presented is also available just online. Like I said, those other resources can be really useful. And yeah, I'm not the expert. These are just kind of things I've picked up along the way. So I would really encourage you to just explore Trados on your own. And I'm sure you'll soon know a lot more about it than I will, than I do. So thanks again. And like I said, I may write a blog post with answers to unanswered questions that came up before. And thank you very much. Have a great day.